This is the Capital Dispatch Podcast.
Welcome to the show. This week we're talking about the school to prison pipeline and why the racist in chief may have just made it worse. So why are we talking about this? According to a Capital Dispatch newsroom article, he recently signed an executive order that reverses federal guidance from former President Joe Biden that was put in place to protect black kids from school suspensions. And the man who should be sitting in a cell somewhere is calling on his administration to replace existing federal guidance, which had advised schools to adjust their disciplinary policies if students of color were found to be suspended or expelled from school at a disproportionate rate. And immediately, folks who actually know anything about education began to sound the alarm. Connecticut State Senator and educator Doug McCrory, who's also a Democrat, says black and brown kids are being kicked out of school far more often and far longer than their white counterparts who engage in the same behavior. And the president of the American Teachers Federation added, it, meaning the executive order, simply ignores a history where black and brown students were disproportionately suspended or expelled from school rather than provided the opportunity to thrive. So why is the education community, and honestly anyone who isn't like completely brainwashed by MAGA, concerned by this latest executive order? Well, black kids get suspended from school a lot, and it's often for subjective reasons that in cases concerning white kids don't actually result in suspensions. And it happens at such a high clip that it led to the concept of the school to prison pipeline, which research suggests shows a correlation of school suspensions, dropouts, and then later incarceration. And the unfortunate reality is this: for people who believe racism is some made up thing or an excuse, or it only exists in the most direct and physical of ways like lynchings or somebody getting called the N-word, the reality is this: racism is largely systemic and it starts in school.
This is the hairstyle that has Daryl George, a junior at Barbers Hill High School in Mont Belvieu, in trouble.
It is a part of who we are.
He's been in school suspension since August 31st. That's the same week Texas outlawed racial discrimination based on hairstyles.
I had a meeting with the principal and assistant principal, and they said that it's because the Crown Act doesn't cover the length of his hair.
That was just last year in Texas, where a black student was suspended for having dreadlocks, which is just a protective hairstyle to keep your hair from drying, falling out, and breaking and all that. However, the administration was scared, so he ended up missing crucial days of in-school instruction. And his story is replicated across the country. According to the American Psychology Association, in 2021, researchers found that 26% of black students received at least one suspension for a minor infraction over the course of 3 years, compared with just 2% of white students. And looking at a few states like Indiana, Maryland, and Rhode Island, black students are suspended more often for minor incidents. You're gonna hear this a lot, like dress code violations, talking back to teachers, and being too nosy in class, according to the Hechinger report. And that report actually was focusing on Ohio, where they found that Midwestern state had issued close to 885,000 suspensions and expulsions for comments and misbehaviors tagged as disobedience or disruptions. And get this, nearly half of those dismissals have been for black students, even though black students only make up 17% of the public school population. Moving on to Georgia, black students make up slightly more than a third of their school population, but they account for the majority of students who receive punishments that results in them being removed from the classroom, like suspensions, expulsions, and even being transferred to an alternative school. And that's according to the Associated Press. And it gets worse when you look at what's happening to black girls. As the National Library of Medicine reports, that black girls are disproportionately disciplined for objective and less threatening offenses like, again, dress code violations, non-compliance, and disruptive behaviors. And if you're not already depressed,
The B Collective hosted a town hall today to discuss a report that says black preschoolers are treated unfairly when it comes to getting suspended or even expelled.
One of his friends was out of school for a week. He was homesick, and the little boy walks through the door, and my son runs to embrace him and just giving him that full experience of black boy joy and black boy love, and they hug, and they end up falling on the floor, and they're just so excited to see each other. And in turn, the teacher got upset, and it was now labeled as a challenge behavior at that time. He was sent to in-school suspension, and he ultimately got a referral.
the National Library of Medicine reports children suspended in preschool are 10 times more likely not to finish high school and experience incarceration or confinement when compared to children who don't have a history of suspensions and expulsions. And black kids make up less than 20% of the population, but are the subjects of nearly half of exclusionary disciplines in preschool settings. So what's going on?
No one is immune to holding implicit biases that may adversely affect students, despite our best intentions. These biases can have a huge impact on our students' outcomes. Researchers watched and recorded the child's level of imaginative play with a set of toys. Imaginative play was ranked on a 1 to 5 scale from low to high, based on how creative the themes were within the child's pretend play. Additionally, teachers filled out reports about the students, which indicated whether they perceived the student to be prepared for school and the degree of conflict between that student and their peers. Upon examination, researchers found that ratings of imagination-based play differed based on the student's race. For black students, those with highly imaginative play were rated as less prepared and less accepted by their peers. However, if the student was white, imaginative play was related to positive ratings in the same criteria. Without realizing it, the teachers in the study evaluated the same behavior differently based on the student's race.
Now, it would be unfair to assume a majority of educators are racist, but also naive to assume that they don't hold some sort of like implicit racial bias, because it's our culture. Racism in America is cultural. It's woven into the fabric of our country's inception, growth, and overall story. And it's also systemic, and those two feed off each other. The more ingrained racism is in our culture, the less likely people are to notice or even react to the systemic instances of it. And the more ingrained it becomes systemically, the harder it becomes to then change that culture. And implicit racial bias, that's our culture. So we've got a serious issue with black kids getting suspended for nonsense, which begs the question, who's suspending them like this? Odds are it's probably somebody white. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, in the 2017-18 school year, 79% of public school teachers were white and non-Hispanic. About 9% of teachers were Hispanic and 7% were black. And if you're wondering why those numbers are so extreme, why the disparity is so extreme, it's our culture. Education in America is every person of color's introduction to racism, period. It doesn't need to be this way, but with Trump's executive order, which is not the law, it shows clearly he and Republicans want it to be that way. Now, in Connecticut in 2015, they did pass a law that in some circumstances prohibits school boards from imposing out-of-school suspensions on students that are in pre-K all the way up to the 2nd grade. And the state did recently actually pass a Crown Act protecting people from getting discriminated against for their hair. So we won't have a Texas situation here. But that's where we are right now, and we got a long way to go.
As the Trump administration continues to defy the law in carrying out its mass deportation campaign, Connecticut State Senator Gary Winfield, the ACLU, and Students for a Dream say the state must do more to protect residents.
We are here today because our community is under attack.
They say the situation for many is dire.
Last night, I got an email from someone who said that they'd rather take their life than to return back to their home country because that's how bad it was.
Since taking office, the president has reportedly defied federal court judges, deported activists, children with cancer, college students, and even several American citizens.
No one knows what the line is anymore.
State Senator Winfield.
One day you have a visa, the next day you don't, and you don't even know it, and then you're gone.
They say the Trust Act, which establishes guidelines for how state and local law enforcement can cooperate with ICE, must be strengthened to allow for the state to protect residents from the federal government.
Because that is what it looks like to stand up for immigrants in our state of Connecticut.
In Hartford, for Capitol Dispatch News, I'm Henry Chisholm.
Madam President, is there business on the clerk's desk?
The state Senate was in session April 30th, and one of the bills they took up was aimed at making schools safer.
We now have a card, which is about the size of an ID card, that has a button on it that you can press, and you can press at different times.
Senate Bill 1216, a Democratic bill introduced by State Senator C.C. Marr, passed unanimously.
In Georgia, there was a school shooting. They had just instituted this system, and within 2 minutes, the police were on site.
The bill allows for emergency response communication systems and personal emergency communications devices in Connecticut schools, and it was inspired by two staples of Westport high school students. Republicans did say they support the bill, but proposed some of the funding going towards armed school resource officers.
The proverbial, a good guy with a gun.
That proposed amendment failed. Another bill of note was one to prevent discrimination by healthcare providers. That bill also passed.
Question is on passage. Will you remark?
Session update for May 1st. Also, shout out to everybody in the Senate circle for not making an "it's gonna be May" joke on April 30th. I appreciate y'all. So the bill we're focusing on today in the Senate is a piece of legislation that requires the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services to give Medicaid coverage for federal Food and Drug Administration approved gene therapies to treat sickle cell disease. It also requires the Commissioner to apply for any federal initiative to increase cost-effective access to these therapies. Senator Matt Lesser, a Democrat, led passage of this bill.
Sickle cell is a chronic, debilitating disease. It puts folks potentially in horrible pain. It can be life-threatening, and it affects too many residents of the state.
Technology has allowed for curative treatments, including cell and gene therapy, but it ain't cheap. In 2023, in December, the FDA approved 2 gene therapies for sickle cell disease. One is over $2 million per treatment. The other is over $3 million per treatment. So thankfully, the bill passed. The Senate is back in session next week, and I'll have an update for you then. So for now, bye. Content on the show comes from NBC and the Kirwan Institute.